been put in. But you don't want any. So whereas normally you'd have the protection of us looking at it and saying, "Oh, we don't allow us," like we have a whole lot of exclusions we don't allow on when it's surplus, we don't have that opportunity to look and see. So it becomes all the more important for the broker to help each business owner with that. Um, and I guess that's, oh, you did have a nice question in here too about, oh, do you have any questions about surplus lines? Does it make
Well,
sense? I know I
yeah,
do.
I guess the biggest kind of risk that you're talking about, or I guess the two risks that you're talking about, is maybe a surplus line insurer because they're not regulated by the Department of Financial Regulation
Right,
here in Vermont. We don't necessarily know a lot about their financial stability.
right,
Potentially, they're not supported by this fund, and
right,
like you said, that they have the authority or the ability, because you're not reviewing their rates or forms, to just say, hey, listen, like if there was
yeah,
a slip and fall by someone who wasn't supposed to be on your premises or something along those lines,
right.
we're not going to cover the claim.
It,
um,
right.
so
Yeah.
there's a lot of
Who
fine
knows? Yeah.
print that it goes on with the surplus lines,
Yeah.
that it could be very important.
Yeah.
Just so that everyone's, we listed or a few brokers on our website. Would you mind just kind of making sure we're crystal clear the difference between an insurance broker and an insurance carrier, so that we're not confused. No one's confused
Right.
about who they're talking to when they pick up the phone and call a Kenny Pike or someone else.
Right. Well, the broker is really working for the business owner, trying to help them to find coverage and assess what their risk is and what types of coverage they need. So it's not actually the insurance company, and then they will go out and figure out like what insurance companies might provide these coverages. And I know Mary had mentioned to you when she looked at some of the coverages that your licensees were getting, sometimes it was provided by different insurance companies. Like they may get workers' comp from one company and general liability from another. But the real difference is that broker should be helping the client to assess what is the risk, what is the exposure, what types of insurance do I need. I know Josh is nodding. Go ahead and jump in if I'm off track here, but that's basically like we're really relying on that broker to help the insured figure out like what they need to buy.
Yeah.
And see what else right, because you basically the I think that's another issue, that thing that's come up is sort of the best practice around commercially reasonable amounts of insurance. That's really tough, and that's going to depend on the assets of the business, what what type of business it is, and that again, like your agent or broker can help you figure out like what coverages do I need for my business. Like you may have a very small business and need a smaller amount of insurance, whereas, or like we talked about, you have um, the public coming onto your property. Well, that's a different exposure than someone who has a very small business where there isn't nobody is coming on your property. So they'll all be different. I know it's really insurance is very complicated.
Yeah.
um, always a lot of questions. All right, let's see what else. I know I have a list of like, and I will say, like, what we're kind of hoping from all these discussions is to maybe help provide more guidance, I think. And James, you had mentioned like on your website, as far as, here's guidelines about like what types of things you may be looking for your business, which I think we can do that. We can't promote insurance companies, but we can certainly try to provide better guidance about like what types of coverages you should be looking for. Um, the other thing I will say, just to give not a plug for DFR, but we do a lot of work with the NAIC, which is the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. And I don't know if any of you are following, but there is a cannabis insurance working group that functions within the NAIC, and they've updated their white paper, which gives a really nice summary of sort of like what's going on with cannabis and in other states and countrywide, and a lot of what we're talking about here, but it gives a really nice full background on it, and changes that are coming, I think. So, but at any rate, DFR, we do monitor those. We follow those all the time so that we try to stay on top of, what's happening or what we would like to see happen in Vermont. Um, all right. I don't want to talk to, let's see here, best practices. Um, I know I
You
have
know,
a
I can,
whole,
pro- I,
oh, go ahead.
yeah. So I'm trying to think. Like, so what I'm hearing is that we don't have any admitted insurers in the state. So if I have
Right,
a homeowner policy from an admitted insurer,
right.
uh, it sounds to me like that policy, if I start a cannabis business, would not cover that cannabis business in my under my homeowner's
Right.
policy. So I just want to make sure that I'm
Yep.
dispelling any sort of myth that might be out there that perhaps
Right.
I'm a home-based cultivator or a home-based food processor and I'm covered by my homeowner's policy.
Right. And, that will differ from company to company, but our understanding is that companies are excluding that on their homeowners policies. And again, it's the sort of thing because it's illegal on the federal level, we weren't able to say no about as far as that exclusion. A lot of times, too, if you're running any kind of business, you want to have a conversation with your agent or broker about just being, full disclosure, because there are some conditions in your policy about misrepresentation when you apply for insurance. They basically will ask you a lot of questions about your home, like, I don't know, like let's say your home, a pool or trampoline or whatnot. So that is part of the whole process that the insured needs to be sort of forthcoming about what's happening on the home at the home. And I know you asked me another question, James, about the auto insurance. Um, it's funny. What my advice there is to talk to your agent or broker, because typically when you are using your personal auto for business, the company will ask you that in the application process so that you can endorse the policy. I know you're not, I like it when Josh nods because I'm not staying on track, but um, we started to look at the policies, and again, I would say just talk to your agent and make sure that there's coverage for that. Um, huh. What else? What have I left out?
Yeah. Well, I'm just gonna ask
Yeah.
the question that I think a lot of people are curious about is there any, you mentioned the NIAC, is there any like light at the end of the tunnel with respect to there being admitted insurers, or, like, is that on the horizon at all? I mean,
Yeah.
like a more
That
traditional insurance market? I mean, probably
right.
not. I can just, the reason I say probably not is just because you need this, what you're referring to is actuarial data about each business type and what are the risks and how do you insure
Right.
against those risks and that exposure. And I just like, until this industry matures
Right.
beyond just kind of the first legal cannabis shop in the
Right.
country was in 2014.
Right.
I think we're still a little early on getting that actuarial data that could actually have a licensed insurer.
Yeah. I think I think you've hit the nail on the head that it's emerging and evolving. And I think that insurance companies don't like that kind of thing. It has to be predictable. You have to be able to say, this is the loss we expect. And I know I can charge this premium and it'll be appropriate. And I think with all these unknowns, that's difficult. I will say, like, I feel like I'm always cheating, but I was like, oh, let's look and see what California's doing, because they've been doing this a long time and they seem to be ahead, as far as. So I want to say, I know the last time I looked, I do think they had like they did have a captive that was writing in California. So I feel like that's probably the way that maybe DFR could be most helpful, is just to be kind of looking to see what are these other states doing. They also provide a lot of information on their website about, accessing brokers and whatnot, which I just have to look into whether we can do that. We're not supposed to promote one and, one over another. So, but that's where I think, I feel like we can learn a lot from other states. And as I said, like, we're very active at the NAIC for that reason. We always feel like we get a lot, like, we collaborate a lot with them, and that it really does help us. But yeah, that's where I feel like, we're encouraged about the Cannabop. That will be filed in June, I believe. And again, it's baby steps, I guess, which is frustrating. But again, they like data, as you said. They like to be able to it's hard if you don't have data. So, and again, the dual legal issue.
Yeah. I do see a hand raised. I can't see what the name of the person is. But if there is a question,
yeah.
Mike.
Yeah, Mike Timbers, Smugglers Not Cannabis in Underhill. And I raised my hand because James, you hit the nail on the head with my problem. Is I was terminated by my homeowner's property insurance company, which I'm not going to name any names. It does business in Vermont and New Hampshire. But the termination letter said because there's cannabis on the property, and that was it. So right now I'm searching, and I'm having some success with Kinney Pike actually. But for me, I'm on an old dairy farm, so I'm repurposing the dairy barn for our cultivation, and but my house is on the property, so I need I need insurance. So thank you for putting this web event together, and I just wanted to add that.
Yeah. Thanks for the comment. And I'm sorry about that situation. It seems like this is where, the industry is moving much faster than the kind of traditional insurance companies are. Josh, I'm thinking actually, just given where we are, that, and we're talking about the practicalities of insurance, it might be good to turn to you next, honestly, and then end with Kimberly, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and actually, there was just one thing real quickly on the, what the end at the light of the light at the end of the tunnel is so standard market insurers are still waiting until federal legalization happens. I think that's kind of the common hold up at the moment. I think some actuarial data exists, but unfortunately, because of the federal nature of cannabis, they're still gonna kind of hang tight. At least that was the theme I got when I was in with Kinney Pike, and every time I met with a national carrier or even a local carrier, that was usually kind of the company line.
So Josh, you have a retail license, and your store's in downtown Rutland. What kind of insurance do you have? And if you don't mind talking about the coverages you have, I don't know if that's private or not, but just the types and kind of the basic amounts.
Yeah. So for my business, for retail, it's kind of broken down into, I'd say, 4 coverage parts. For myself as a retailer, the most important coverage outside of workers' compensation for my employees is the general liability, the premise exposure. Because we have a high volume and we're dealing with, high traffic, general liability, we carry $1 million coverage with per occurrence coverage with a $2 million policy aggregate, which means that's the most that an insurance company would pay during the 12-month policy term for any amount of losses that we have. That covers our slips, trips, and falls. If somebody, hurts themselves in any way on our premise, they're going to come to us first and foremost. So that's our paramount coverage for Mountain Girl Cannabis or any retailer. We also do carry product liability coverage. Not that we are a manufacturer of products or, anything of the sort, but we carry product liability because, generally if somebody has a bodily injury claim from a product they purchased at my store, they're coming to me first. And within the insurance policy, at the end of the day, whether it's my product liability exposure or the cultivator or manufacturer, the insurance policy has a duty to defend clause. So that means that, I've got defense cost coverage if I do have to go to litigation, because somebody's bringing suit to my business. So, we think that's, that product liability, even though we don't have any direct products that we cultivate or manufacture, it's still important for a retailer to have. Other than that, we carry business personal property coverage. We don't own this building, but we do own the improvements that we've made to it. as well as the contents of the building and our business personal property, the inventory and things of that nature, as well as workers' comp for our employees. As a business owner, you have a choice in Vermont whether or not you choose to take workers' comp coverage out for yourself as officers, as well as your employees, but employees are a requirement. No workarounds with 1099s. You know, if they are working exclusively for you, they are a W-2, they are considered an employee, whether you're filling out W-2s for them or not. So just make sure that you have the workers' comp in place.
Do you as a retailer want to see that the manufacturers that you're buying manufactured products from also have product liability?
We do, yeah. I mean, ultimately, adequate risk transfer is important to us. You know, if we do have a claim that arises from somebody else's product and it's in no way manipulated by us, we don't want to assume the loss or the liability. And in a lot of insurers are going to make sure that you have some kind of tracking policy in place as a retailer, that you are collecting certificates of insurance showing that your suppliers have product and general liability coverage.
Can you talk about the difference in rates for kind of what you're paying as a cannabis business versus if you were selling, you know, baked goods, non-cannabis products?
Sure. Yeah. So a product liability policy is the most cost prohibitive policy for a cannabis business. They come with minimum premium clauses in there. So the minimum premium on most product liability policies is $2,500 annually. And that doesn't even include, because it's surplus lines, there's surplus lines taxes of 4% on top of other policy fees, underwriting fees, inspection fees. It ends up being about $3,000 annually for just your product liability insurance.
So given that this is like a high value crop, high value product, and a largely cash industry, are you seeing your insurance companies require anything special with respect to, you know, security or employee training or are they kind of coming in and checking out your place and saying, well, we'd feel a lot more comfortable, or your rates might go down if you had 10 cameras as opposed to 6 cameras?
Yeah, so the rate reduction isn't generally happening through those underwriting requirements, but it is underwriting acceptability, whether a carrier will actually insure your risk, and they require, you know, whether I'm a cultivator or a retailer, they require, you know, security cameras focused on the crop, or in my case, all parts of the retail function. For me to have theft coverage of my money and inventory, I have to have a vault that's of specific weight. It has to be 900 pounds or bolted to the ground if I want theft coverage on my business personal property. As far as my training and stuff goes, yeah, they want copies of my employee handbooks. You know, some of my policies and procedures around cash handling are requirements. You know, what are my protocols for, you know, active hostile situations. And then, you know, just kind of, they want to know more about, you know, employee retention and payrolls and things like that as well.
So really, I mean, it sounds to me like this is not a conversation that anyone who's thinking about becoming a licensee should put off. This is foundational to your whole operation. If you want to get insurance, you know, whether you're a retailer or not, it sounds like there's going to be underwriting requirements that might change your whole business model.
Yeah, and honestly, a little bit about, you know, my background. I was selling cannabis insurance since 2018. I've been in the insurance industry prior to opening this store for a decade. And you know, the requirements for cultivators are pretty strict. Again, to have certain coverages or to be acceptable to certain insurance companies, they want to make sure you're using LED lights versus HPS as an example. If you're doing an outdoor cultivation, they want to make sure your spaces has fencing around the grow area that is vision obscuring. In many cases, they want it to be 8 feet, unless you can show kind of that you're in the back 40 somewhere that doesn't have visibility to through traffic or roads and streets and things of that nature. So the underwriting requirements are pretty strict, across the board, whether I'm a retailer or otherwise.
So I'm a prospective, smaller cultivator. What sort of documentation, like how do I prepare for this call to Kenny Pike or whomever else, this intake call that you want to do?
Yes. So definitely talk about your security, and again, I think the common theme, even with Rose, is transparency is important. Your policy is gonna cost the same, no matter what. So lay all your cards out on the table. It's very important to understand for the broker, which is the position that I sat in, to understand what your total risk is. Definitely have your security plan locked down and understood. Talk about if you have employees or not. If it's just a one-person operation and you're operating off your property, let the broker understand what your grow space looks like. They're going to want to know, and this is a totally arbitrary number, but they're going to want to know what your first 12 months of gross expected revenue is. So start thinking about those numbers. They want to know what your products are. What are you offering? Are you just selling bulk flower? Are you selling prepackaged flower? Do you have plans to use a third party to manufacture, carts and distillate edibles, that kind of thing? So really think about that and understand, what kind of business you are operating and what your vision is, right out of the gates.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the exclusions on the surplus line? Are you seeing any? Did you, when you were at Kenny, see any kind of traditional exclusion, like common exclusions that people should be aware of?
Yeah, in a lot of cases, first and foremost, in more cases than not, if you're buying two separate liability policies. So if you're buying an insurance policy and you think it's reasonably adequate as a retailer or as a cultivator and it's $900, chances are you're just buying general liability. And right out of the gates, look at the quote, because in most cases it'll say product liability is excluded. So you're going to end up with probably two policies to cover what's reasonably adequate for liability purposes. So a lot of times, if the policy premium sounds too good to be true, it's probably because they're just quoting your general liability. I'm seeing a lot of what I was seeing mostly was, cultivators having exclusions for things like vapes and stuff like that, or in general, just, the vape exclusion or tobacco products. Certain additives, like caffeine and things like that, are excluded on policies. So if you're a manufacturer, keep an eye out for that stuff. If your plan is to sell flower currently, there's a lot of times smokable cannabis exclusions on a policy. So just be mindful of that. My recommendation is, when you get a quote from your broker, ask them to give you a list of exclusions. And they can easily give you that list of exclusions, and you don't need to read all the fine print to identify if a policy isn't right for you. It's right in the title. The list of exclusions will say something like smokable cannabis exclusion. It's a true one. I've seen that, and I've seen it. So just keep an eye out on those type of things, right out of the gates.
Is there any way of knowing whether you're talking to a broker and they're kind of giving you a quote? Is there any way of knowing that insurer's history of paying claims or their just general financial stability?
Yeah. So when you get an insurance quote, more often than not, on the quote that they present you, it'll show the insurance carrier, and it'll also show their it's called AM Best rating. That is generally a combination of their financial strength as well as their kind of history of claims payment. And Rose, you might know the answer to this better than me, but I think I don't know if it's the Better Business Bureau, but there is a place where you can actually, there's a website, and it's the name is escaping me, where you can actually look up a carrier, and it will have like a kind of full deep dive on their claims history, on their payments, and customer satisfaction overall in general.
This. Oh, Rose, are you gonna?
No, oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just a mute, of course. I just wanted to say, I don't know off the top of my head exactly what that is. A Better Business sounds right, but I think I could find this out from our company licensing folks, and I'm happy to share that with James, and we could, share that with the team. But I did want to throw out one thing which didn't. It is one of the distinctions with excess carriers or surplus lines carriers. They are subject to our cancellation and non-renewal requirements, which is like one little exception. So, for example, if someone had a midterm cancellation, they would have to follow our statutes on that. So it's a little carve out where we do have that little protection. So if anybody ever had a problem, they could, we do have consumer services, and we could be helpful with that. But just wanted to let you know, like we have like strict, you have to get notification by certified mail, and it must be 45 days notice and all that. But right. Yeah, but I'll look into that and find out for you. But yeah, that's really helpful.
Josh, can I circle back to this one question that that maybe you have some real world experience with, is just okay, I'm a cannabis cultivator. I just harvested. I use my personal vehicle, which is covered by my personal auto insurance, to transport that cannabis as part of my business to a product manufacturer, or a product manufacturer to a retailer, or any part of the supply chain. Do you have any sense of whether, and I get into an accident, whether my auto insurance, because I'm using it kind of for my business, my personal auto insurance is going to cover that, and then again, you throw cannabis into the mix, and it's kind of like, okay, they've got every reason to try and deny coverage.
Right. I would, yeah. And the short answer is probably not. That's really no different than if you were a contractor who was using his personal auto policy for business purposes as well. It's, really a personal auto policy. It's not adequate for business use. So an insurer is gonna find any way they can to exclude a claim. If you're using a personal auto policy for business purposes, the rate structure is different, and there's probably, there's definitely, writing in there that says it's not, not intended for business purposes on that policy. And along the same lines, I did want to circle back to the home piece just real briefly. If you're a home-based cultivator, and you gave me some good indicators as to, unfortunately, who non-renewed you. I forget the gentleman from Underhill, and that's going to be the common theme across the plate. So if you're doing any cannabis business, in most cases your homeowner insurer is going to non-renew you. So they're going to follow that protocol that Rose was talking about. They're going to give you 45 days notice, and they're going to not renew the policy, and that's kind of pretty much what I've seen out there. Any kind of overlapping from personal and business, whether it's on the auto or your home policy, it's usually a dead stop for the insurance company.
So we've heard commercial general liability, we've heard product liability. All 5 of our license types. Are there other specific types of insurance that any of those licensees may want to look into, given their permitted actions? And do you have any? I mean, our regulations say commercial reasonable levels of insurance. There's a reason why we said that, as opposed to specific dollar amounts or coverage amounts. But
annual aggregate, and again, that just means that $2 million is the most they'll pay during that 12-month policy term. If you have a frequency of claims, that's that's just the cost of doing business. If you do anything less than that, you're putting yourself at greater risk. And honestly, I don't even know that there's an insurance policy out there in the cannabis space that will insure you for less than $1 million per occurrence. And then, again, it's a matter of covering your tangible business assets at that point. Like ourselves, we carry the business personal property insurance. So there's the liability, which I kind of say is the intangible, and then there's the business personal property or contents. That's not a requirement of the Cannabis Control Board, but it's a recommendation, a piece of advice that, try to, think of this as a legitimate business, and you have assets to protect, just like you would your home and your personal contents. And, highly recommend that you carry coverage for your personal assets. That's a loaded response, because things like the crop, while it's out in the field, before it's been harvested, in most cases, is virtually impossible to find coverage for. But for finished stock and other things, insure what you can.
I see we have a question. I just wanted to ask before we get to that, are you seeing any innovations either, in the surplus lines around things like crop insurance or home-based cultivation insurance? Are you seeing anything that can kind of like fill this gap, this very clear gap that we've, we all know it would exist in other industries? Certainly crop insurance is a thing that, for agricultural products exists, but are you seeing any innovations along any of those lines?
As far as crop insurance goes, that's still a tricky one. They were making some serious strides during, kind of the hemp, space, and they were looking at, affording coverage for hemp grows. One of the unfortunate things that Vermont falls into in that area is that we're small, right? We don't cover, so much space. So even like Rose was saying about captive insurance, cannabis businesses are small in Vermont. They don't hit the premium thresholds to even fall into a captive. A lot of those captives, their minimum premium entry point is $150,000 a year. They're built for large scale grow operations and in large cannabis businesses in other states that just have that. So the crop is still a tricky one. I have seen that some carriers, some business insurance carriers, are affording coverage to people who are doing home-based cultivation indoor and otherwise, which is quite a difference from when it started. So that's positive. Again, the catch-22 being your homeowner's coverage is still going to kind of walk away from you if they find out that you're growing, on the residence. I think what Rose said about AAIS stepping up to the plate to kind of introduce that type of, policy is great. What I'd like to see is actually co-op insurance writes mini farms on the AAIS form, and that's kind of like a hobby farmer policy. I'd love to see that. That's where your home-based tier ones would really kind of fall into. So hopefully this is, maybe a step in that positive direction. Where it kind of blends the home and the kind of agricultural based activity. So that's promising. That's good news.
Frank, did you want to weigh in? Let me see if I can unmute you. Okay.
Yes.
Frank.
Hello?
Oh, there you are. Yep, we hear you now.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you, Frank.
Hello?
Yes. Frank. Oh, there you are. Yep, we hear you now.
I just want to say thank you.
We can hear you, Frank.
Hello? I just want to say thank you for helping the small craft growers. And I hope we can sell our product soon.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. There's a little bit of feedback there, but I think I got the message. And we really are trying to make this market accessible. There are just fundamental barriers that we have a tough time getting around, which actually I think is a good transition to Kimberly. To talk about from a practical standpoint what the CCB requires when it comes to insurance. So Kimberly, again, is our director of licensing here. She puts her eyes on every single application that gets approved. She answers a lot of questions every day, and I thought she'd be a good person to talk about what we do with respect to insurance. So I think let's just, at a fundamental level, is insurance a requirement of licensure in the cannabis world?
It is indeed a statutory requirement. I'm going to do a little bit of note reading here. So 7 BSA 901F, each licensee shall obtain and maintain, I think that's the key word here, commercial general liability insurance in accordance with rules adopted by the board. And failure to provide proof of insurance to the board as required could result in revocation of the license. So we certainly want to avoid circumstances like that. We are looking for documentation that is showing that commercially reasonable insurance policy at the point that folks are making that submission. We understand that there are challenges there, and so there's other opportunities in addition to the traditional insurance that folks can provide to the CCB in their application, and that would come in way of escrow account, and that would be something that folks could work with a professional like an attorney or a bank to establish. And so that is also an opportunity. We would require that if you're going to go that route, that there's evidence of a good faith effort. So that might come in terms of email chain that you've had where you've been seeking and not able to find appropriate insurance. So I think there's a couple of ways that you can get at that would satisfy what we need to see that you've made effort to do so.
Yeah. Essentially, we have a self-insurance option. However, we really want to discourage that because we know that not everyone has $1 million or $2 million to sit in escrow. And if you did, you probably could afford an insurance policy to begin with. But, that's the commercially reasonable level there. And it's kind of, but we know that not everyone's going to be able to get insurance, that it might be a fundamental barrier to entry. So we did, but it is a statutory requirement. And then, I have a question for you about, did we require specific types of insurance and specific amounts? I would just say, before I ask that question, when the board was creating its initial round of regulations, there was this tension that we kept running into by being very specific in rule and just setting a bright line as to what's minimally acceptable. And then, on the other hand, we wanted to make sure that we weren't just fundamentally excluding certain businesses from participating because, the exposure of a small cultivator that's out kind of, in the Northeast Kingdom, not around many people, doesn't have any employees, maybe only has, 25 or 50 plants, maybe can't afford, $2,500 or whatever in insurance. So we tried to an early draft of our rules had a very specific amount of insurance coverage that needed both on the commercial general liability side and the products liability side. We got a lot of pushback through our public comment process about just having some flexibility. So we changed the definition of what's required to commercially reasonable levels of insurance. And we let people kind of get their policies and then we would review them and give people some flexibility. But in that, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I'd like to just say that what Josh was speaking about specifically is a lot of what we are seeing those ranges that are coming in, both with the general liability and the product liability. And also maybe just a good point to add, that we've been working with both Rosemary and Mary over the last couple of months to really try to build information that we can share with folks to sort of get at what we're seeing in terms of some of the exclusions, and be able to make not recommendations for carriers, but recommendations for what hopefully things track in terms of what Josh is seeing, but be able to really look at some of the things that folks are providing and sort of summarize that for someone that's new coming into the business and needing a little help in the insurance area. So I think we're tracking with what Josh is saying, and we'll have some more information that we can give to folks as we really start to dig into the policies that we do have to see what is being excluded, what's being covered, what is not being covered.
So, we've done some internal metrics. It takes on average about 90 days for us to kind of from the date of submission to the date of approval to issue a cannabis license. Do people need to have a policy in place during that 90-day window?
Answer would be no, but they do need to have a quote. They need to be able to provide show us that they are, having those conversations at the point that we make a recommendation to the board, and the board approves that application. We will issue a notice to the applicant with conditions for their approval, and one of those would be to show proof of the insurance. So if the process starts even before the application is submitted, we recognize that there's some months and some costs. So we're working with folks to give them some flexibility in terms of when they have to have that in place. So we are looking for it at the point of being able to issue that. And I say most of the applications that we've approved have been with conditions for insurance finalization.
So I know that we've asked people to upload these letters, these binders. I think what would be most helpful for us moving forward, I think a requirement of renewal is going to be that people upload their actual policy so that DFR and others we can do the work of just seeing what are the typical exclusions, what are the kind of actual coverage amounts, what are make sure that people aren't buying illusory policies or policies that aren't going to cover their actual business activities. But can you talk a little bit about what people need to provide the board to satisfy this proof of insurance requirement?
So if they already have a policy and they're renewing, we can look at that binder as being the piece that they're giving in that process. If we don't have that policy, we will be asking for it for the purposes that you talked about, so that we can start to build some of that data, if you will, and year 3 be able to provide some more information for folks either coming into or looking to maybe make business changes, upgrade their policy to a different tier, that sort of thing. So we're trying to be flexible, but we're also wanting to make sure that people, are protecting their businesses. So we'll be looking for those policies.
Josh, does that sound unreasonable to you? Just having people submit their actual policies to the board?
No, it doesn't. I think, I think at the control board level, what I would be requesting is a certificate of insurance, because that is actually, it's required by the insurance broker to issue it. So that kind of gives you the idea that coverage is still in effect. If somebody bought a policy but lapsed in coverage, they might still have a copy of that policy, and the effective dates are kind of, it's 12 months. So just for your own kind of purposes, I would be requesting specifically a certificate of insurance.
Great.
Yeah. And then what, Kimberly, should people do, our businesses, if their policy lapses or is canceled for some reason with respect to their communication with the board?
So I think the first thing and the most important thing would be just to let us know. And you can email us at our CCB applications inbox, so that we're aware of the situation that you're in. And I would say if you're not letting us know and something does happen, you know, you'd be dealing with just something that happens. Plus, you know, it could result in an enforcement action. So we're trying to help people avoid that by just letting us know, and keeping in touch as you're working through those reassurances. And also just a quick note, that if you have an LLC, that those also need to be renewed annually. And so that, I don't know if you're going to get a notification to renew that. You might want to look at just putting that on your calendar, because that would also be a situation that, you know, there's a reason why you are protecting the business with the LLC, and to have that lapse on top of, you know, insurance lapsing, and just a lot, I think, that you could see as a result of, you know, things happening perhaps that you just didn't realize were going on. So just a reminder on that one, and that would be through the Secretary of State's office.
There's a question in the chat, which I don't fully understand the question. So maybe Phil, if you're still with us, maybe you might want to unmute and just ask it of the group, and maybe we can find an answer.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Well, it's just, you know, we were looking at building a garage to use as a space to grow, and it seems like it's not possible because we would lose our homeowners insurance or whatnot. I mean, is anybody else in that kind of position? Do you need to own the house outright before you can consider it a location to do something like this?
Josh, you've probably seen this situation a couple times.
Yeah, so I can definitely speak to that. So your current homeowner's carrier is not going to like the grow on the same deeded property as your you know, where you have. So chances are you're gonna have to find a new homeowner's carrier. Now the scenario that you laid out, where it's not in the residence, it's in a detached structure, separate of the residence. There are actually homeowners carriers. They're non-admitted, but they are ones out there that will insure that. So you know, I would reach out to, you know, a broker. And again, the key is transparency, right? You can go with your homeowner's insurance, but once they get wind of it, they're gonna non-renew you. But you can reach out to your homeowner's broker, and if he tells you there's no options, reach out to somebody that the CCB recommends for cannabis insurance, and they will be able to. I say Kinney Pike because I work for them, and I've transferred a lot of knowledge to them, to the broker on my kind of cannabis you know, operations. But I've written homeowners policies for folks like you who have the grow in a detached structure. It's not pretty, it's not cheap, but it does exist. And you know, certainly I would say won't prohibit you from proceeding with your business plan.
So I recognize the time, and I really appreciate all of the kind of advice and your willingness to participate. Are there any final questions from the audience before we wrap up for tonight? And I see we have one phone. If you join by phone and would like to ask a question, you can hit *6 to unmute yourself. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. You know, this is a really complicated world, the insurance world, and you know, it's a statutory requirement. Thank you all so much. You know, yeah, Frank, is that you? Complicated world, the insurance world, it's a statutory requirement. Yeah, Frank, is that you?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Frank, for some reason, we're getting a lot of feedback
on the homeowner's insurance, and I have the insurance with CCB.
Frank, there's a lot of feedback on your line, so I'm just going to ask them. I'm going to ask that maybe you just email the board info@ccb.gov or
.info.gov. CCB.
You should say it.
Yeah. ccb.info@vermont.gov.
Okay. If you can email the board, we'll get an answer to you. And just recognizing the time, I'm going to let Josh and Rose and Mary get back to their lives. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing the information. Really, really helpful to unwind this piece of the regulations.
Thank you very much for having us. It's great.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.